Hello and welcome to today's lesson about division of decimal numbers. First, let's talk about some of today's vocabulary that you will need to know for our lesson. Decimal point. This is the period that separates whole numbers from decimal numbers. In this case, we have 83.68, which is the same thing as 83 and 68 hundredths. It separates the whole number from the parts of numbers. Our final vocabulary term for today is magnitude estimate. This is a rough estimate of whether a number is in the tens, hundreds, thousands, or other powers of 10. For example, the U.S. national debt per person is in the tens of thousands of dollars. In everyday mathematics, we give magnitude estimates for such problems as how many dimes are in $200 or how many halves are in 30. One of the first things you always want to do when you are dividing decimals by whole numbers or other decimals is make a magnitude estimate. In this case, we're going to look at the numbers 36 and 6/10 divided by 3. I know off the top of my head that there are at least 10 threes in 36. If I can push myself a little bit further in my math facts knowledge, I also know that there are 3 12s in 36. Either way, my magnitude estimate for the quotient of 36.6 divided by 3 will be that it's going to be somewhere in the tens. This will help us to make sure that our answers are correct in the end. Now let's look at using the partial quotients method for dividing decimals. As you can see, I have gone ahead and set up my partial quotients division problem. I have the number 87 and 6/10 divided by 12, and what I'm going to start out by doing is I'm going to actually ignore, so I'm just going to put a little X through it, this decimal point for right now until I'm finished with the problem, so that this way it makes it a little bit easier for me to deal with. So now what I'm going to think about is 876 divided by 12. Using my math fact knowledge, I'm going to think about how many times 12 might go into 80. And I know off the top of my head that 12 goes into 60 5 times. So 50, because this is 800 we're talking about, really not 80. 50 times 12 is going to be equal to 600. So I'm going to start out by subtracting that 600. 6 minus 0 is 6, 7 minus 0 is 7, and 8 minus 6 is 2. So I'm left with 276. Next, I'm going to kind of consider the number 27, and I am going to think about how many times 12 might go into 27. I know that 12 times 2 is equal to 24, so I know that 12 goes into 27 2 times, but since this is 276 that we're talking about, it really goes in 20 times. 20 times 12 is 240, and when I subtract that out, I get 36. Then I know, again, I know my 12 math facts, so I know that 12 goes into 36 3 even times. 3 times 12 is, oops, not 12. Let me erase that. 3 times 12 is 36, and when I subtract 36 minus 36, I get 0. And I'm going to come over here to my right side and add things together. 20 plus 50 is 70, and 70 plus 3 is 73. There is no remainder in this case. Remember, we've got to look at that. So my answer is going to be 73. Now here's what we have to consider is that I actually had a decimal point in there and it was sitting right there. So I'm going to bring that number straight up to the top. Not that number, I'm sorry, that decimal point straight to the top, and I'm going to add it between the 7 and the 3. The reason that I decided to put my 73 here at the end and not up here at the beginning is because I knew that 12 didn't go into 8 any number of times. So when you're lining this decimal number up at the end of your problem, at the end of your work, you're going to make sure that you line it up with the tenths place and the ones place and the tens place, depending on how many numbers you had in your original problem. All right, let's take one more look at this partial quotients method using decimals before we move on to our practice problem. So now I have the number 9 and 48/10, and I'm going to be dividing that by 4. As we talked about previously, the first thing I have to do is make a magnitude estimate to figure out about how big my number should be when I'm finished. If I round 9 and 48 hundredths to the nearest whole number, I'm going to get 9. So I'm really thinking about 9 divided by 4, and I know that that answer is going to be somewhere in the ones. So that's my magnitude estimate. So I know that when I put my decimal in, I should have a whole number in the ones and everything else should be behind the decimal. The next thing I'm going to do is think about the number 948 and start deciding how many times I think 4 can go into that. So knowing my 4 facts and knowing how many times 4 goes into 9, I'm going to come up with a number 200. This is because I know that 4 goes into 9 2 times evenly, and since we're talking about 900, I have to add my 2 zeros to the end of that to create a number in the hundreds. 4 times 200 is 800. So I'm going to subtract 800 out, which is going to leave me with 148. Next, I have to think about how many times 4 might go into the number 1. It doesn't because it's too small, so I'm going to move on to the number 14. I know that 4 goes into 12 3 times evenly, but since I'm talking about 148, I am going to use the number 30 instead of just 3. 30 times 4 is 120. So when I subtract that out, I get 28. And I know, again, my math facts for 4, so I know that 4 goes evenly into 28. It goes in exactly 7 times. 7 times 4 is 28. And when I subtract that out, I get 0. So again, I have no remainder here. Then I'm going to come back to my right side and add my numbers up just like I have been. 200 plus 30 plus 7 is the same thing as 237. So I'm going to write that up top here. It's not 297. 237. Not sure where I got the 9. Now, since I know that my answer has to be somewhere in the ones place, that it's only going to have one whole number and the rest are going to be decimals, because of my magnitude estimate that we looked at earlier, I know that I have to come back over here and put my decimal point in right here between the 2 and the 3, which would make my number in the ones place. So my final answer for 9 and 48 hundredths divided by 4 is 2 and 37 hundredths. Here is your practice problem of the day. Use the partial quotients method to divide 8 and 49 hundredths by 6. Make sure to create a magnitude estimate first and then do your division. Use your magnitude estimate to place your decimal point in the correct spot in your answer. Good luck!